Today we're going to talk about epidemiology. Chapter 19 is all about epidemiology and how epidemiologists study diseases and help determine or the best mechanism to decrease disease within populations. So some of the terms that epidemiologists use often is morbidity, mortality, and case fatality. Morbidity is the incidence of a disease in a population. So basically, you're looking at what is the percent of individuals that might get sick within a population. And then you have the mortality rate is the overall death rate. So if you do get sick, how many individuals are actually going to die from this disease? So we're looking at communicable diseases, not non-communicable diseases. Non-communicable diseases, things like cancer or heart disease, those things are epidemiologists don't really focus on. They are focusing on diseases that can spread from person to person. The case fatality rate is a percentage of a population that dies from a specific disease. So again, these are communicable diseases. Influenza would be an example of a serious disease that has killed many individuals. Diseases can be seen as endemic. So an endemic disease is a disease that is always present within a population. Best example is a cold. We always have colds present. When a cold becomes super common in an area, then it would be called an epidemic. An outbreak is a group of cases that pop up at the exact same time within a population. And then a pandemic is a global epidemic. So if we're going to have a disease spread from one person to another person to another person and end up having an epidemic, there are a number of events that have to occur. And the first is that the pathogen that causes the disease has to be in that environment. And so the habitat for a pathogen, the natural habitat for a pathogen is called its reservoir. My example of a reservoir that I always talk about are rat fleas and Yersinia pestis, or rats and Yersinia pestis. Rats are the natural reservoir for the bacterium that causes the plague. Another example, this I just found on the internet, so I thought it was kind of cute. Cats are the reservoir for Toxoplasma gondii, which causes toxoplasmosis. And so here, a cat comes to your house. Well, this can cause a disease because this cat come to the house and, oh, someone ordered toxoplasmosis. So what do cats do? They get into their kitty box and they think maybe, but probably they're doing more than just thinking. And then someone has to clean that litter box. Within the fecal matter are these little protozoans that cause the disease. And so someone's going to have to clean the kitty box. And then if you don't wash your hands after cleaning the kitty box, and instead you go and make yourself a sandwich, now you're probably going to get some of these protozoans in your body, and that can cause the disease. So a reservoir for an infection is the natural habitat. Natural habitat could be in a human or a non-human animal. It can be found in the ground or on the ground in more natural areas like dirt, soil, water. If the reservoir is natural, it's going to be a lot harder to control. If the reservoir is an animal like rats or mosquitoes, then we're able to control them a little bit easier. If the reservoir is, or if the reservoir of infection is symptomatic, shows symptoms of the infection, we can also be more wary of the disease because we know that the individual, the organism, the animal has some sickness. If it's asymptomatic, two examples here are two viral infections, herpes simplex and HIV. Both of those can be asymptomatic and they can still be transmitted, and that's a lot harder to deal with. We can transmit disease both vertically or horizontally. Vertically, we can transmit disease from mom to fetus, mom to infant via childbirth or breastfeeding. Horizontally, we can transfer person to person by physical contact, through water, food, vector, or through non-living materials. So here's horizontal transmission, coughing out a lung, vertical transmission, breastfeeding. Indirect contact, talking on a phone. You see this man right here. He's talking on a phone. That could potentially, whatever person was on that phone before him could have had some type of sickness like a cold, and now he could be receiving those germs. Airborne through sneeze. It's kind of a gross looking picture, but it happens. Through food and water, through direct contact, and then through vectors like insects. And that's actually a tick. So direct contact occurs through physically touching individuals. Most often we see direct contact through children or through couples. The hands are the main vehicles for direct contact, and so one of the best preventions from transmitting disease is washing our hands. Indirect contact involves transmission via non-living materials. Examples, we might have a candy bar that someone gave to you, Kleenex that someone used and you now have to clean up, a doorknob. These are all non-living materials that could potentially be indirectly transmitting infections. Droplet transmission. This is another type of indirect contact where you are, maybe sneezing or coughing, and the droplets will hang in the air, and then you can still, even if you weren't in the area where the sneeze occurred, you can still breathe in those droplets with the potential pathogen. Food and water. I just like those pictures. One of the easiest way for microbes to get into your system is through the food that you eat or the drinks that you drink, because they can go right in through that oral route. If you don't clean the items that you're using for cooking, that is going to make it even easier for you to transmit pathogens. So, if say I use this cutting board and these scissors to cut up chicken, and then I just rinse everything off, and then maybe all I did was rinsed it off and I set it next to the sink, my child comes along and decides they're going to use the same scissors that are sitting out to cut up lettuce. Well, if I just cut up chicken with those scissors, an hour ago, and all I did was rinse them off, there's still probably some salmonella on those scissors. And when I cut up the lettuce that I'm not going to cook, the salmonella can then grow really easily. And then we have vectors. Vectors are living organisms that carry diseases. The most common, they carry diseases from one organism to another. The most common vectors of disease are arthropods. Arthropods include your insects, your ticks, your mites. You can have vectors carrying organisms internally, so then they would be called biological vectors, or externally, those would be called mechanical vectors. And so here we have a mosquito, the Anopheles mosquito, who carries malaria. And one of the best mechanisms for protecting yourself from malaria is a screen. So they have these screens that they put up. They have mesh netting that keeps mosquitoes from being able to get in. Here's these are fleas. Marianne, maybe we should consider moving to a cat that's less content. So we have fleas that are just totally going crazy. And here we have lice with knit lotion. Reconnaissance pictures clearly show the enemy's chemical stockpile. These are very funky looking lice, but that's what they're supposed to be, I'm pretty sure. So just kind of little jokes, but all of these can be vectors of different diseases. So external vectors are known as mechanical vectors, and mechanical vectors just carry disease from one surface to another surface. They can carry disease internally or externally as harborage or as mechanical vectors. If they're just carrying the disease, they're not part of the life cycle, then they're just considered a mechanical vector. The best example are flies landing on your food. So the flies, typically they land on a lot of materials. They try to eat materials. They do so by vomiting on the material to start the digestion process, and then they suck up the material that they vomited on. So if they, say, land on a pile of poo and get some nutrients from the poo, and then they fly over to your hamburger and land on your hamburger, they can carry on their legs E. coli from the fecal matter. Sorry. Biological, here's another mechanical. This is flea. So rat fleas, they transmit Yersinia pestis. Yersinia pestis, when it gets into the rat's body, it clogs up the gullet, and the gullet is like the esophagus that leads down to the stomach. And so when the flea has its gullet trapped or covered, then the flea can't swallow the food down properly, and when he bites a human, he will actually suck blood in. When the blood can't go anywhere, he'll vomit back into that human, and when he vomits back into the human, Yersinia pestis bacteria will come out as well. And so the Yersinia pestis is transmitted, but it's still not part of the life cycle, so that would still be just a mechanical vector. And so this is what plague looks like. So biological vectors, here's a mosquito. Mosquitoes carry malaria. So the protozoan Plasmodium spreads malaria or causes malaria. what this protozoan does, though, it gets inside of the mosquito and has part of its life cycle in the mosquito, the sexual reproducing portion. So the protozoan gets into the mosquito, has sexual relations with another protozoan, and then moves towards the proboscis region of the mosquito. And when the mosquito bites a human, the protozoan is moved through the proboscis into the blood of that human. In the human, the protozoan has its asexual stage. So this shows biological vectoring, where the vector is a part of the life cycle of the pathogen. And that's what protozoan Plasmodium malariae looks like inside of the blood. So it breaks blood cells open, causes hemolytic anemia. And so most of the time, or a lot of the time, one of the mechanisms for treating these infections is by controlling the vector population. I'm going to stop here for this lecture, and then I'll get the next lecture going, okay?